Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dr. Kyle Explains, your YouTube channel where we go through GCSE science content quickly and easily. Today we're going to be going through a required practical. Really important, as required practicals add up to at least 15% of your papers. So this is for chemistry, and it's how to make a soluble salt. So without further ado, grab a pen, grab a paper, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so a quick refresh of some key content. A base is a chemical that neutralizes an acid. Alkalis are soluble chemicals that neutralize acids. So alkalis are soluble and bases are insoluble. An acid plus a base makes a salt plus water. And because it's making water, that means it's a neutralization reaction because of the acid. So therefore, the base has neutralized the acid and made a salt plus a water. Okay, so this is the required practical that you need to learn. So how to make pure dry crystals of copper sulfate. Now, in this sentence, there's some very important words that you might not necessarily recognize as important, and they are pure. So that means, in chemistry at least, a substance by itself. I'm just going to write alone there. So it's just by itself, completely pure. Dry, obviously, no water. And what you're actually making, so copper sulfate. Now, there are two ways you can do this, and I've written the equations down here. So you could either use copper oxide, so that's obviously your base, or you can use copper carbonate, and that's obviously your base as well. Now, I have also seen questions where they say the pupil has made mistakes in the method and you need to identify the mistakes. So one of the mistakes the pupil might make is, for example, using HCl. Because if you use HCl as an acid, you're not going to make copper sulfate, you're going to make copper chloride, which is obviously not what you want to do. Or you could maybe use just copper by itself, which probably wouldn't be reactive enough to actually make copper sulfate. So be really careful when you're reading this question to see if there's any hidden mistakes that you need to be able to identify. Okay, so how to make pure dry crystals of copper sulfate. Now we're going to use this first equation here as an example, but you could just as easily use copper carbonate as well. So I've got a picture here of some sulfuric acid, and as you can see, it is a clear liquid. Now you react that with the black powder here, which is copper oxide. So the first thing you might want to say is measure out 20 centimeters cubed of H2SO4, sulfuric acid, into a conical flask. Okay, that's your first part. Then number two, what you're going to say is you're going to say add an excess of copper oxide. Copper oxide. Now, this is really important, excess, because what you're doing is by adding an excess, you are getting rid of your acid, because remember, you want to make pure copper sulfate by itself. So by adding an excess, you're making sure that all of the acid has reacted. So once you've done that, you're going to end up with a beaker looking a little bit like this, where you've got lots of this black powder. Now remember, this is insoluble because it's a base. We've reacted it all with the acid, so the acid's now gone, and so you've now got leftover copper oxide. So you now need to get rid of that. So number three, what you would say is you would say filter with filter paper and a funnel to remove excess copper oxide. So now you know that that has now gone from it as well. And remember, you could also just easily do this with your copper carbonate as well, but we're doing it with the copper oxide for this example. So when you filtered it, what you'll find is you then have a blue solution like this, and this is your copper sulfate. But remember, it's copper sulfate that's at the moment dissolved in water because the copper sulfate is soluble. So now you essentially need to remove that water. So how are we going to do that? Number four, we're going to gently heat using a Bunsen burner and solution in an evaporating basin. And then you're going to say until the point of crystallization. Until the point of crystallization. Now, what's happening here? If you imagine having your evaporating basin, essentially what you're doing is you've got your copper sulfate here and you're heating it up from the bottom, and your water is starting to evaporate off. Now, eventually what's going to happen is this solution just here is going to get more and more concentrated until it eventually becomes saturated, and your crystals of copper sulfate are going to start forming on the side there. That's the point of crystallization. So then number 5, you would allow to cool for kind of 24 hours, 48 hours, not too important that exact step of how long for. And then lastly, you would pat crystals dry. And eventually, after kind of 48 hours, 24 hours, you would see some lovely blue crystals of copper sulfate just like this. And this is how you would make your pure dry copper sulfate crystals. Now, this is a required practical, as I said, so it's really important you fully learn this method and understand what's going on. So you need to be able to understand it in order if there are any errors that you need to be able to identify, and you just need to be able to understand exactly why you're doing things in a certain order. So the copper oxide is added in excess to get rid of the acid. The water is heated gently to remove the water. You're filtering to remove the copper oxide. Each step has a specific part in order for you to get pure crystals of your copper sulfate. Thank you very much for watching. Please do go through my channel for more GCSE Science help. And remember, if you ever need any help with your GCSE Science, Dr. Kyle explains.